Thank you. Brenda, back to you.
I'm going to jump in with one slide that's not going to require any action by the board, but hopefully will address Ms. Yee's comment as well. GASB continues to be very active. We continue to see new standards, exposure drafts being issued. It seems like on a daily basis, not quite that active. But wanted to point out 3 that are on the street now that will be effective in June of 2017, 16, and 17. The one that I think is most important to the board is the first one, statement number 75. It's kind of if you think of GASB 67 and 68, how we can't almost say one without the other, this is the complement to GASB 74 that Alexis spoke about. And this is not going to have any impact per se upon CalSTRS, but it's going to have a significant impact most likely on its constituents or the LEAs throughout the state. Very similar to 68 that put the liability for the unfunded pension amounts on the financial statements. This will put the unfunded other post-employment benefit obligations on the books. One can argue about funding levels within the pension sides, but we've been working on it for the last 100 years. Most often on the pension or on the OPEB side, it's been a pay-as-you-go basis. So what we're seeing across the country are the numbers that shocked us that came out of 67 and 68 pale in comparison in relation to OPEB. So again, does not have a significant impact upon you or the board or CalSTRS, but it will impact your constituents most likely very significantly.
And we will probably have a similar policy related to our OPEB obligation for our staff, because we will have a share of that.
Shifting topics, and if I could request you to turn to item 3C or ARM 87. We also issue our independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters based upon an audit performed in accordance with government auditing standards. As Brenda said, we perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, or those that are published by the AICPA, as well as those that are published by the federal government through the Yellow Book. We obtain sufficient understanding of the entity and its environment, including internal controls, in order to plan the audit. We're not opining upon it. It's not a PCOB type report where we actually identify all significant internal controls and opine upon them. It's the basis of planning our audit. Therefore, we may not identify all significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, and it's kind of a byproduct of our audit. But I still think it's a very incredibly important element of the audit, and particularly for those charged with governance. In the current year, we did identify one significant deficiency. It's labeled 2015-01, Internal Controls Over Member Data. The information embedded within this deficiency is very similar to what had been reported to you in years past. If you will remember, that it was previously reported as a material weakness. We have 3 levels of deficiencies. When we identify a weakness in internal control, it's by definition a deficiency, and then we have to rank its severity. Is it a material weakness, one that we just believe that there is a complete absence of internal controls and a material misstatement could exist, and management would not be able to identify it? Significant deficiency is much less in magnitude than that, but still rises to a level that we believe that those charged with governance should hear about it. And then just a deficiency, which under the auditing standards we're not required to report to the board. We can communicate either orally or written to management. In our evaluation in the current year, we deemed this particular instance to still be to move from a material weakness to a significant deficiency. We recognize the significant progress that the system has made with respect to internal controls over the active member census data, as well as inactive member census data and retiree data. Some of the elements that we've seen is the improvements of access to the secure employer website to remit timely and accurate information, the enforcement of penalties and interest, the enhanced analytics that have been enabled by Business Direct, their ongoing data cleanse project. I think management is going to take some time during this presentation to also talk about the development of a comprehensive risk control matrix that's documented the process, in my mind, from an end-to-end process. I think if you remember, several of our our past presentations, we've talked about silos embedded within the system. They have undertaken a task to try to break down those silos and understand the impact that member data has on a variety of different business units, and it's embraced all elements of the executive team and their teams, and I'm pleased with the progress that they've made. So our recommendation to continue to move the bar on this finding is to finalize that comprehensive risk matrix, as well as continuously test that as part of any robust internal control system. You continuously monitor whether those controls are working and continue to enhance. So as that becomes routinized within the organization, I think it will only improve. The other elements, and I'm pleased that I do believe that the new pension benefit system will also go directly in relation to improving this, but this was a chance for management to kind of put their hands up and say they couldn't do anything until the pension benefit system. They didn't take that approach. They said, what can we do to improve this system right now? And I'm very pleased with the efforts that they've made. And Larry, I believe we have, if there's any questions related to this letter, I'd be happy to answer, but I do believe there's a resolution.
Bob?
I can wait. I'll wait.
Okay. Let's see. Betty?
Thank you. I first just want to thank the staff for the ongoing effort to make improvements in this area, and actually I really appreciate the comprehensiveness of the approach in trying to continue to make improvements here, and which is a tough area because we have to obviously rely on the employer's internal control systems in terms of getting us to a better place. My question really relates to, I guess there was some thought about seeking legislation that might help us with respect to streamlining employer reporting and really relying on the state tax reporting by employers. And I'm not familiar with the state tax reporting, but just in terms of the consistency of the information that's reported to what our needs are.
Well, I think we have a couple of concepts that we're working with here. I believe in the regular board meeting, we're presenting a concept around seeking authority to get tax reporting information that is already going to the Employment Development Department on at least a quarterly basis from our employers, and using that as a benchmark to test the completeness of contributions. So one of the challenges we have is because we're relying on the employer, we don't really have a yardstick against which to measure those contributions in terms of their completeness. So that would give us that ability. We've attempted to actually use the State Controller's Office website but we've discovered, as you are well aware, that data is spotty. And so what we have been able to do is where we can find that information, we are able to use it as a yardstick against what we're getting. But because of the spotty nature of that information, we're looking for authority to utilize information the employers are already submitting to the Employment Development Department to actually develop some trending against the contribution files that we're receiving. There is a second concept that is not yet at the point where it's been incorporated into an item for the board, but is referenced here in the discussion. So I guess I just want to clarify that. Well, we're thinking about our reporting timelines, and right now we have different reporting timelines for different benefit programs, and so part of the challenge in terms of even doing analytics against the information we get now is that we get it in parts and pieces, and so it would be administratively and analytically much simpler and perhaps better for all parties if we could get things in a consistent way. And so that hasn't yet reached the point where we have worked to see what is plausible, but that is an idea that's incorporated in our management response. So two different things, one of which is related to a piece of legislative policy that we're bringing to the board this time, and another one that is not yet ready for that, but is something we're discussing here.
Okay, I get it. I was a little alarmed by the, obviously, any kind of access to tax records is always a little sensitive, but this is really to try to get a better handle on the completeness of the information.
Right, and
So
again,
for
it
testing
won't,
purposes.
it won't match. We know that because obviously there's a different data set. Part of our employers' employees are in CalPERS and part of them are in CalSTRS, so that has to be, and then not all of the compensation that's taxable is creditable. So, but there is given the tools that we have available now, there are ways to actually do the analytics and measure those differences over time to look to see if those anomalies are consistent.
You're welcome.
Brent?
Thanks, Mr. Smith, for pointing out and explaining the significant deficiency and explaining, kind of illustrating staff's efforts when they had a material deficiency or weakness last year. But I was wondering, my question is to Bob as our independent consultant. You know, to what extent should we rest on our laurels and say, that's great that we don't have a material weakness, but it's a significant deficiency? Put that into context for us.
Thank you, Mr. Boyken. So, yeah, I was going to raise a question on this anyway. Now's a great time. When I saw that come through my inbox, the first question I had is, all right, what happened? Why? So as an auditor, I get nervous when things get worse, but I also get nervous when things get better. So we're just nervous people. So I wanted to know what happened. And so I engaged in a conversation with the auditors and asked some pretty direct questions. The first question was, all right, are you receiving any pressure from management? Is management tired of having this show up? And they're asking you, is there anything you could do to downgrade this? I wanted to know. And I was assured that that's not the case at all. Second question is, are you getting soft? And that's pretty much how I asked them. I wanted to know if they had a change in their opinion. I want to know if they're getting soft, because they need to stay frosty. And I was assured through discussions that was not the case. These auditors are not getting soft at all. Well, if that's not the case, then what happened? Is the underlying issue going away? And that is not the case. The underlying issue of data integrity and data accuracy exists and still must be dealt with. Now, there's a long-term solution, which is a technology solution. But that's long-term. And the question is, what can we do in the interim? And that was a difficult issue to grapple with. So there are two things that happened, if I may discuss what those are. Mr. Smith discussed one fairly comprehensively, which is the organization as a whole is making advancement on many fronts, which reduce the risk of misstatement of the information. But that, in my understanding, or my opinion, was that might not have been enough to do it. That might not have been enough to take it out of the category of a material weakness. But there was something that, and it's funny how, Mr. Boyken, but a sentence is showing up in a report can represent months of hard work. And the sentence is in relation to a sort of a front-to-back risk matrix, just that word sort of mixed risk matrix. And what is this thing? And so I wanted to know what this was. So I started digging into what this was. So what happened is that management made a decision, a conscious choice, as Mr. Smith alluded to not wait for a technology solution to wind this up. Instead, management said, and in particular there was a leader of this, and it was the chief operating officer, which I'm bad with, Ms. Lynchnock. And I think it would be appropriate for the board for her to discuss exactly what this is. She's closest to it, and she's the one who did it. So if it pleased the board, I would recommend the board hear from her. But my understanding of that initiative was sort of a head-to-tail analysis of when someone comes into the system, what does that impact? How does the data get entered? How does it go through? How does it get processed? And follow it through what Mr. Smith referred to as silos. So there's sort of a financial reporting silo, a benefits and services silo. And when the information gets transferred from one silo, if you will, to the next, how does that handshake occur? And where are the risks with respect to inaccuracies coming into that? And then, of course, the information comes from employers, and as Member Yee pointed out, the accuracy of that is important as well. So someone had to grab the bull by the horns and say, all right, let's just sit down and understand this process from head to tail. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time, and no single person does this, but someone has to head it up. And it's learning about internal controls, it's learning about financial reporting and auditing procedures. This cuts across a lot of areas, it involves a lot of work. And it's not a lot of fun. Internal controls are fun to me, but I can understand why they might not be in someone else's job description as enjoyable. Nonetheless, someone had to do this. And so it is my opinion that management's comprehensive understanding of this specific risk played a role in risk mitigation itself. Understanding a risk can be a risk mitigating factor to an auditor. And I believe that that played an important role in taking what was a material weakness and bringing it down to a significant deficiency. That is my opinion. Did I answer your question, Mr. Boyken?
Yeah, I think so.
I apologize for taking so long.
Cassandra, do you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
absolutely. I'll address the activities that went on this last year. And, you know, while I may have been the ringleader in initiating this, it was a lot of work from a lot of people that I'll go through as I walk through this. Larry and I started with discussing, having a conversation with Brenda and Kevin to really get an understanding of what makes this material rather than a lesser deficiency in the audit. And so a lot of it is the visibility of our internal controls and the documentation. And what we recognized and what we understood is that we had a lack of documented processes in our end-to-end process in the organization. I know Kevin discussed the end-to-end, but that really is a good description of what we needed to develop for addressing a demonstration of what we're doing in the organization. It's not that we don't have internal controls in the organization and procedures and policies. We just don't have a holistic, documented view of what that looks like. So that it's hard to rely on the work stream of information coming into the organization and how it finally impacts the financial statements. And like Dr. Yetman had said, there's a lot of different areas where information coming into the organization touches areas, and the individuals that are responsible for those responsibilities understand their role, but they don't necessarily understand how it impacts other areas or how their work impacts other areas. So what we did is we got the executives and directors over all of the areas that are responsible for member data coming in, contributions, benefit payments, and really just rolled up our sleeves and started writing on the whiteboard the work stream. It was hard, it was painful because it takes time, and I really needed to have the senior leaders dedicate time to this, and they did. They were all extraordinarily enthusiastic about trying to get this resolved, and I know that they relied on their staff. But that's how we started the process, and then we documented the data from the employer level and traced the life cycle through its impact on the financial statements. And so what we did, it's been referred to as a risk matrix, but what we've called it is our member data to financial reporting matrix, and it's big, so it really goes deep down into the functions of the organization. And we mapped data that flows from the employer into CalSTRS, member data, payroll data, the census data, and chronicled its progression through to the financial reporting. And then we mapped the associated contributions from the reporting entity, the employer to financial statements work stream, and we charted how incoming data is used in our actuarial valuations in the determination of our net pension liability. And then we documented the benefit payment process from the initiation through finalization and posting on our financial statement. So when we were all discussing this in the room, and having Robin and Rick Reed, our actuary, and the senior leaders from the benefits areas, and we also had somebody from our IT area who was an expert on the START system and letting us know how it's running through the system and how it impacts the other, the system-wide. So walking through those processes and discussing it and having everybody hear their perspective on how this data flows and how it impacts one another was extraordinarily helpful. I don't think anybody has actually done that and had a holistic discussion such as that before. And then once we mapped all of those, we identified the primary functions correlated with the processes, and we identified the risks addressing the completeness and accuracy of data coming into the system. And then we identified the controls that were in place to mitigate the risks. Because we do, like I said, we do have controls put in place. We just needed to document those and have them somewhere to where we can look at the stream. And when we were talking about the risks in the organization as a group, we didn't just limit it to asking Robin, what do you see your risks as? Or asking our member account services, what do you see your risks? We discussed those. They provided their individual input, but then they shared each other's perspectives on what each other's risks were, and we incorporated those as well. So we really tried to capture and catalog every single thing that we could think of. And I think that we've done a really good job, and I think it's going to be augmented as we move through this, but we captured it into this risk member to financial data matrix. And then we noted whether we had written policies and procedures to determine and outline the documenting the processes. So if there was a procedure or something, a process that was in place to mitigate a risk, where can we show that we have a documentation that exists? How do we audit against that, or how do we test it? So we wanted to make sure that we had those in place. And if we didn't, we started implementing the development of those. So now what we're doing is we're assessing the effectiveness of the controls, and we'll be able to test the controls. The information that we've gathered and created has not only helped this scenario, but it really is organizationally, it's for the bigger purpose of trying to make sure that we're managing our member data and reporting accurate and complete information. We'll be able to use it with Robin's team in the enterprise risk management to evaluate and map risks. The pension solution project has already asked, we've been building requirements for the pension system. And one of the things that now we have is a holistic view about how data runs into the system and impacts one another. So they're looking at it to make sure that we're mapping the requirements effectively to the work streams that are occurring. So, I think that it has been a significant amount of effort. Again, a small part of me just starting the process, but I wanted to share with you the people that really worked diligently on this. First and foremost, Larry Jensen was extraordinarily helpful in bringing his expertise in risk management, workflow processes. He worked very diligently and was key in getting this resolved. Along with Jan Spano, who is our manager over our enterprise risk management, and her team, Alex Mora Huerta and Melissa Cheever, who they mapped and have cataloged and are the custodians of this matrix, which is very big, and they're managing the content of that. Robin Madsen has been extraordinarily helpful with all her expertise, of course, and Rick Reed, our system actuary. Tom Richwine from Technology Services, who is an expert in our START system. Andrew Roth over our benefits and services area. Peter Haley over member account services, and Christine Brasino over service retirement. They are the senior leaders that participated in this, but I know that they were reliant on their staff in gathering the data and collecting all of the information that went into the documenting all of the processes. So there was a lot more people that were involved, but it really was an aggressive effort to try to get some movement in this. And I think that I'm very happy that we did make the progress that we did, and I thank the auditors for recognizing and understanding all the activity that went into it.
Great. Bob, did you have more to say?
This makes me really happy. Because the first step in mitigating any sort of risk within an organization is to truly understand it. And I feel like this was a really huge step towards understanding the risks over the accuracy of member data. And the fact that this is done before the technology solution is just really wonderful. And the benefits to this will exceed, it's greater than just mitigating a risk over member data. It's when one gains an understanding of the internal controls of an organization, there are benefits that extend far beyond that. You've heard of some, but I think, and like I said, it's one sentence in here, and so it would be easy to say, there wasn't much done, but it was the more I dug into this to find out what this was, the more I became, more happy I became that the organization put forth this tremendous amount of effort to learn something about itself. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful, and I too am very, very happy, and I think the Cassandra, thank you for the explanation of what went into this, and I think this committee recognizes how much of an effort it was and how much of a priority it became within the organization. We haven't heard from Jack. I don't know if you want to say something, because I know you're very happy about this too.
Well, I'm ecstatic, but I think Cassandra did a great job of presenting just how you dig into the guts of the organization to do this. That's the hard part. And, coming off of the prior project with Business Direct, the organizations get tired. So I just want to thank everyone that worked so hard on this to re-energize and take it on.
Well, I think, the great thanks go to the staff, as well as to the auditors for not getting soft and keeping to push us. And, we've been dealing with this for several years. When I took over as chair here, I didn't quite know what I was getting into in terms of the fact that there were these weaknesses pointed out, and so I think it's been great. The committee has had the opportunity to get status reports. I guess the question becomes: should we continue to be getting status reports on the addressing what's now just a deficiency, but not a material weakness? And I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking yes, so I think that's the right thing to do. So
the word significant still
right.
is strong. It's on that slide, so we need to keep going.
But the distinction that was made by Kevin between what is a material weakness and a significant deficiency seems significant, and so it's good to know that we've made that progress. So thank you, everybody, and I don't know if there are any other comments that anybody has. Okay, so we another motion now to accept this.
To adopt the resolution to accept the independent auditor's report on internal controls.
Okay, motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, great, good, thank you. And then I think we have one more. Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
3D
Kevin.
or ARM 94. So again, earlier I had mentioned deficiencies, significant deficiencies, and material weaknesses. So by definition, a deficiency, we've noticed a weakness in internal control, but under our auditing standards, we're not required to communicate that to those charged with governance, only to management. But here's where I will commend management. They believe in being very transparent with their members as well as those charged with governance, and they've asked us to briefly highlight those deficiencies that we had noted to management to you. We did have two. And again, no matter how we viewed these deficiencies collectively, singularly, we did not believe that they rose to the level of a significant deficiency, but we noted one within the information technology, primarily related to log and account monitoring. If you remember, there were there was several more deficiencies within the IT department last year that were noted. We continue to see great progress being made. Several were dropped. Some continue on because they're in various statuses of completion. But we're very pleased with the progress being made in the IT department. The second one's related to disclosure. So I want to point that out. It's a disclosure only. It's not a balance sheet or an income statement amount. But it's disclosing the amount of the unfunded commitments within the private equity and the real estate funds. During our substantive test work, we noted 4 different errors. None, again, impacted the balance sheet or the income statement. This is a very manual process. The amounts can fluctuate up or down based upon how account statements are reconciled and treated on a month-to-month basis. One would expect it to be a difficult task. It is, like I said, very manual in nature. With that, we're recommending some improvement in communication between in the investment department and investment accounting or financial reporting around this process. We're not recommending the purchase of a new system it's not that. And again, it's why this is a deficiency, not a significant deficiency. It's a very manual intensive process. We think it just may be worthy of another set of eyes on it before it's turned over to the auditors. So not trying to turn it into something that it's not. Those were the only other deficiencies that we noted throughout our our audit engagement. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions prior to the resolution.
I don't see any, Bob. No, I don't see any questions. So, would somebody like to make a motion?
So move to accept the management.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Well, thank you, Brenda, Kevin, Alexis. Thank you for appearing here. Thank you for walking us through these reports in such a clear manner, and thank you for all the work you're doing. I think you've been partners with us for several years now. I think it's been a very productive relationship that I think have moved the organization forward. So I think we owe you a lot of thanks, as well as our staff, and I think this was a good report. It was an enjoyable report to get this year, shall I say? So thank you very much.
I would say stay frosty.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, I think if you ask others in the organization, we're not soft. I think they would agree. So we're definitely not soft. But thank you. Thank you for those nice comments. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the next item is item 4, the Chief Auditor's update. Larry?
Yeah, we have a lot of activity going on internally as well, and I just wanted to just take a minute and update the committee on some of those. We're making good progress on our audit plan to date. With regards to our employer audits, we had an aggressive goal of 45 this year. For the first quarter, we've actually completed and issued reports for 14 of those audits. We have issued another 6 draft reports, and in total we have 41 employer audits in progress. And so we are making good progress and on track towards meeting our plan objective there. Also, with regards to internal audits, we have a number of audits that are underway. We've concluded our review of the ethics and compliance program, some of their primary functions that they performed, as well as we're looking now at authorized system access. You saw that also mentioned in the management letter today. We're also taking a deeper dive and broadly looking at all primary systems across the organization. We also are looking at our accounts receivables and auditing that area, as well as IT asset management. And then we're performing a performance review of our compensation review unit. The results of these audits should be available for the committee at the February meeting. Also, in compliance with auditing standards, we're required to have what we call a quality assurance review at least every 5 years. And this is a review that's performed by an external firm of our audit services activities. So it's kind of like who audits the auditor and make sure that we're doing our work right. We have issued a what they call a supplemental information request to 8 various firms. We received responses from those firms, and we're selecting a firm to move forward with and look to have that report to the committee at the June meeting for completion. We also have a couple of other external activities that we're facilitating. One that I think is real important is an audit of our private equity area. We had a lot of discussion today with regards to valuation efforts, and so we actually have Macias, Ginny, and O'Connell out auditing 4 of our private equity partners. We're looking at 13 different funds. One of the objectives is they're looking at the valuation methodologies that are used by the partners, and so we are taking a little deeper dive on actually their processes, their internal processes, rather than simply relying on their financial statements. In addition to that, we're auditing the capital calls and distributions, and also the incentive and management fees and the calculations. And that report should be available for the committee at its February meeting as well. I think that will be an important item. In addition to that, we have some statement of works that we're developing for audits that will be performed in our global equity asset class, as well as our IT infrastructure, and that'll have an emphasis on cybersecurity controls. And so we have a lot of interesting topics that we're approaching right now. I think that We're on track with our plan, and I'm happy to report that. One other area I'd just like to emphasize is that we continue our educational efforts in trying to help our school districts and employers understand what are common audit findings. I reported previously that we submitted a circular letter that had our 6 common audit findings. And we've done some outreach. Yesterday, I actually gave a presentation to the California Teachers Association representatives that provided an overview of the audit process, what to expect from an audit process, what do we do while we're at the districts, and how do we communicate those results, and what are the common issues that we're finding. This Friday, I'll also be doing a presentation at the Association of California School Administrators. And again, we continue to educate these folks on what are our most common audit findings in order to try to prevent them in the future and to provide them resources so that we can avoid potential problems. And so we're continuing in that effort. Other than that, I look forward to concluding some of this good work that I've mentioned and look forward to our February meeting. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Doesn't appear to be. So let's move on then to item 5, which is a review of information requests. Do we have any?
No, I don't think we have any.
I don't think so either. Okay. The draft agenda for the next meeting, item 6. Do we have any comments from Larry, Robin, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, when he was giving his presentation, highlighted a couple of upcoming GASB standards. One in particular was 75. And although that will have a very small effect, a very immaterial effect on CalSTRS financial statements, it may well, and I suspect will indeed, have a very large effect on the school districts, the employers. And I think it might be worth considering the board asking for some sort of educational session. There's time. It's not. It doesn't come into effect for a few years, but I think it would be a good idea for the board to be informed about the effects this will have on the employers, not necessarily on the fund itself, because this is for OPEB benefits other than pension, and to the extent we've had pay as you go rather than pre-funding, of course, the amount of liability that will need to be reported on the financial statements because of them could be substantial for some of the districts. And that carries with it a set of implications, and I think it might be worth the board thinking about receiving some education on that at some point in the future.
Any thoughts from the board on that? Grant?
So a number of years ago in the Benefits Committee, we used to get reports on kind of the landscape in terms of school employer health benefits, and we don't have, other than the Medicare payment program, we don't really have our own. But when you're talking education, Bob, are you talking educating the board or educating employers about what's coming down the pike with respect to GASB?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Boyken. Starting with the board and then moving out.
And then I'm just wondering too, is the Audit and Risk Committee, the 5 of us, is that the appropriate place? And, I'm not disagreeing with the idea, and I think what we found when we've surveyed the landscape is there's a lot of variation out there in terms of who gets what, and it'd be interesting to take a look at that again. So I guess that's my input.
Well, I think it's Robin.
So
Go ahead.
perhaps I can work with Ed and Andrew, and we can come back to the ARM and maybe have discussions with Benefits and Services about the appropriate scope of an education item in either place. Because it is a variable, I think, in terms of how employers are addressing post-employment health and other benefits.
I think it's a good idea. I think the question is where should the presentation be, here, or Benefits and Services, or the full board, where we get a lot of reporting on what benefits, what the retirement outlook is for teachers. And so I think it's a good one. I think the question is, and maybe staff can come back to to me and to Harry, and I think Dana chairs benefits and services, and figure out the right place to do it. But thank you, Bob, for the suggestion. I think it's a very good one. Yeah, go ahead, Grant. You still have the floor.
I don't have.
Oh, you don't. I'm sorry. Your name is up here. But.
So the other thing is, if we could come back with, maybe we could work with the school districts to try and, get an updated survey of what the employers are offering. And then also I'd be interested to know to what extent are the employers contributing to either the CalPERS, OPEB trust fund, or the other competing trust funds out there.
Any other thoughts about the next meeting agenda? We got a lot on it. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, item number 4, the education item, it talks about progress on the CalSTRS ethics and compliance program. This will be an update from our outside consultant who's reviewing the entire organization with regards to a compliance program. Her name is Rebecca Walker, and she's right now doing her discovery inside the organization and taking a look at our maturity and compliance, and we'll be making some recommendations. So at a prior meeting, we had talked about this as a presentation to this committee prior to adjusting your charter.
Yes.
Basically, we wanted to have a compliance function before we started reporting to you on it. So this is the next step in that process.
Okay.
So that's what that item is.
Good. Look forward to that. Larry?
Just item number 6 on the agenda there, which is our external financial statement auditor request for a proposal. They mentioned today that they're in their 5th of their 7-year contract.
Yes.
And had completed that, so they have 2 more years. It's time that we have a discussion about how to proceed forward, whether we move with another RFP or look at other options, and I'll be presenting that in this item here. So there are some trends with regards to firm rotation or partner rotation in the industry, and I'll have some best practices in that area for committee discussion as part of this item. So if we wanted to start thinking about that a little bit in advance, that would be great.
That's good. Rather than get into it now, that's great to hear about it. We'll discuss it in February. Wonderful. Looks like we got a lot of good stuff to talk about in February then. Good. So opportunity for statements from the public. Is there anybody? I don't see anybody at our microphone, so I guess not. So our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.